welcome to the Nashville Story. I'm Stuart Deming.
And I'm Aaron Pennington, and today we have a great episode with author Jake Brown. He has this new book, Behind the Boards, Nashville, his 50th book. The 50th book. Incredible. Wow. Great catalog from Jake Brown. But today we're going to be talking about more his new book, Behind the Boards, Nashville. It's out now. Links in the show notes. This book features behind-the-scenes interviews from 30 of country music's top producers about artists such as Tim McGraw, Miranda Lambert, George Strait, Clint Black, Taylor Swift, and more. We are happy to have Jake Brown on the show today to talk about his book, as well to talk about Nashville and the music scene as well. Jake Brown, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right, so we'll get to your book, Behind the Boards, Nashville, in just a second. But before we do that, we want to know Jake Brown and Jake Brown's Nashville story. So Jake, what is your Nashville story? How did you even get to Nashville, and how did Nashville play a role in you being where you are today?
Well, okay, so there's kind of an elevator speech version of that. When I was 11, I grew up in the Midwest in St. Louis, and my mother and my Aunt Heather, my brother and I went to see Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet tour, and we had really bad seats. So we're sitting on the side of the stage so they could kind of see the stage, but I chose to sit in what they saw as the worst seat because I got to watch all this sort of magic stuff going on backstage. I was like people moving gear, and I play 6 instruments. I grew up a musician and in bands and stuff, but it was just kind of before that. But I saw all that and I went, wow, that's what I want to do. Like I wasn't looking at the stage and going, wow. Now I'm a published songwriter and stuff too, but I'm just saying, my initial love of the record industry came from behind the scenes, and that informed my entire career. So I moved to Los Angeles at 21. We had lived in the Washington, D.C. area in high school, and so I went to 930 Club a lot and was watching a lot of Mosh shows and Fugazi and a lot of punk, and I played in bands. So my background was a musician and going to Los Angeles to become one professionally. So sure enough, 21, threw my drum set, my guitar, my futon, and my cat in my car, drove out there, got in a group very quickly. Got my first record label job at 22 with a label called Cleopatra Records, which taught me kind of the business. Then I worked at Geffen for about a week and quit there and had an opportunity because they just wanted, it was just not the particular department. You know, when you're young, depending on the record label department you work in, it can define your entire career trajectory without you realizing it in a bad way or good way. And oftentimes people are so excited to be working there, they don't really care where they work. And it could be good or bad. So anyway, I moved back to New York, basically. From there, I lived there a little bit in college and set up in Brooklyn and worked in Manhattan and started my own label and got distributed at 24 by a great company called Big Daddy Music. And so I did rock for a lot of years and moved here in 2003 after living in New York 5 years because this place was a cow town back then by comparison to now. It was small. It was affordable. It had an amazing personality of people who were all really friendly. And I moved here with 2 books published. And how that had begun is back in New York, I'd met a publicist that represented a group I won't mention that she was looking to have a book written on. And I declined that one, but told her, look, I have an idea for a book on a record label owner named Suge Knight that I would love to do. And he was just getting out of prison, and Death Row Records, again, the behind-the-scenes thing. In the 90s and growing up in the 80s, and I read books like Mansion on the Hill and The Hitmen and, of course, Danny Sugarman, a lot of these book writers that back then it was a very different business. There was no internet. So you really got all of your behind the scenes. This was way before Behind the Music.
Yeah.
So you really had to go looking for it. So what I wanted to do was write a book, and I guess it became a template for everything I do that gave you the human story, but also gave you really like a look at behind the scenes of how the record business worked. And having worked in it already a couple years, it kind of gave me a biographically factual background from which to also write, because I'm also a record executive. So, I mean, I've been distributed now 20 years. I mean, and I, have 200 songs in my catalog and on and on and on. So, but what I'm getting at is a lot of the books I write, the point is also to say as an author, I'm informed on how that business works from front to back. But on the other side, I found that the Suge Knight book, because we don't use any anonymous sources in any of my books, all my publishers know that going in, which means I've been sued never, which is great compared to see. Well, that's important because if you're going to write about someone's life I find it best to try to write with them. And if you can't write with them, and the first, so that Amber Books gave me that Suge Knight deal, and then I wrote for them for about 7 years. And I came up with these 2 series ideas when I moved here. One was called Behind the Boards, and it was the second or third book that I started working on. And basically, it was with rock producers. And so Hal Leonard eventually picked those up, and Volume 1 came out in 2012, and Volume 2 came out in 2014. And then I wanted to do a Behind the Boards Nashville, but in the interim of that, I also started a series called In the Studio, which is trademarked, and it's 15 books in it. And as this is my 50th published, 50, which is a number I'm proud of, is a benchmark, a goal I set for 2020 to hit by. So, but what I was lucky to do is sort of be able to bring a little bit of that insider, I guess, knowledge. And then also I got lucky in that a lot of people were willing to talk to me. So, the Behind the Boards series, as one example, has legendary, Bob Ezra and Eddie Kramer, Jack Douglas, Hugh Padgham, type level producers. And it was from front to back. And that was really a good training ground for this book, because then, the In the Studio series, I got lucky and wrote one of those with Ann and Nancy Wilson and Hart. And that kind of put me on the map as a rock writer in 2007 and 8. And then Lemmy Kilmister, I met him through a book I wrote with a porn star named Jasmine St. Clair. Back when I was just taking whatever books I could get, which is advice to any writer early on: take whatever comes your way. Don't turn anything down, even if it's not within what you want to be defined by. Because if you have a large catalog, it'll be one of many, many books. So anyway, I met Lemmy through that, and I pitched him. Actually, pulled over on the side of the road driving to Chicago to visit a buddy of mine. I said, "What the F?" and called him, and he said, "Yeah, well, send me Hart." I sent him Hart, and then on the drive back, I FedExed it to him. I called him back, and he said, "Yeah, let's do it." So then that gave me a huge amount of sort of boost, having Lemmy talk to me, and he just doesn't do a lot of that kind of stuff. So luckily, those 2 books it sort of launched the In the Studio series. There's one on Dr. Dre, Tupac Shakur State I wrote one with, and they authorized. So I found with that series, you could go behind the scenes of any music genre and access the same sort of blueprint, but with a completely different backstory, because A, you had a different band, B, you had a different genre or artist, and C, you had different sets of producers with different ways of producing. So the idea was to try to develop a series that would allow you to do a 3D view into, how these different groups worked. And we didn't get into the drugs and the sex and stuff. This was purely about record making. So I found everyone was willing to talk to me. So anyway, the In the Studio series, that led to my thinking of, okay, well, I've been here 10 years, because it wasn't 2012 till I started having any interest in country as far as writing about it. And I thought, well, Nashville songwriter. And then I thought, oh, there's no way, someone's got to have that title. And the great thing is, if you come up with a title as a writer, another piece of advice, cheapdomainregistration.com, $9.99, or GoDaddy, $10.99, and you can register the title of a potential book series.
Yeah,
it's a .com, and it gives you a proprietary sort of, more likely people are going to look and go, oh, that's not going to be, useful because no one has it. Right. Amazingly, no one had Nashville Songwriter.
Wow.
So is that dumb luck or what? And no one had Behind the Boards. So I was like doubly lucky. I've been lucky throughout my whole career. When I say come up with it, I thought in my head for the first time of something I'm sure other people might have there. In the Studio. Who in the heck would not have In the Studio? No one had it.
Wow.
So, I own that now. That's my series. So my point is, you can sometimes get lucky with an idea, but to sell any book, you've got to have a catchy title. You've got to have a title that people can reference as a sort of a concept, like, oh, boards. Most people know nowadays with the Empire Show and other shows that display the record industry. They know what a console or a board is. So it's sort of it's like saying In the Lab for hip hop. So anyway, that Nashville Songwriter series came out at the same time the first book, that the memoir I wrote with Joe Satriani came out, as a legendary instrumental guitar player. And between the two of those and the press we were fortunate enough to get for those books, it helped me kind of launch Nashville Songwriter in this town as a signature series. And then I did a second volume in 18. And the whole time I was like wanting to do Behind the Boards Nashville, but I knew I needed to wait until I had enough credibility in the media, the country music media, which if anyone doesn't know, and y'all know, is a very different I mean, country music is the second best-selling genre next to hip-hop in the world, and but it has one of the most sort of, I want to call it, like if country media covers an artist and no one else does in the pop realm, because that's a big crossover leap to make. You can still become a superstar just within the country media coverage you get from, be it CMT or American Songwriter or sounds like Nashville.com or yourself or whomever. These are people who have been generous enough to cover this book, Wide Open Country. And so we're grateful to plug them. But, so it showed me how special and unique Nashville is in the fact that country music is kind of a self-contained unit. And people, country fans, if you know any, I know many, don't care if people outside they don't, like country outside of the South. So my point is, but there at the same time, it's got this universal appeal. And at the same time that I was writing, they're releasing the second National Songwriter book, which had 4 songwriters. The first one had 19. I started working with a guy named Big Smo, who was a country rapper, on his memoir, My Life in a Jar, the Book of Smo, which is out now. And that gave me an education I didn't have on country rap and how important country rap was way back in 2010 when it started with him and the Lax and Colt Ford and Bubba Sparks in infusing the hip hop rhythm underbelly of what now is a very modern subgenre within country. I mean, this is how we roll, and Joey Moy is in this book. So leading up to this book, I feel like all these other books were training to write this book because I needed the education on how the songwriting side worked here to Music Row, which is very different. Everything's done kind of in houses and it's like a full-time machine that works. And we have another volume, the National Songwriter 3, that comes out next year. It's got another 30 writers. So I really sought out, and I'm lucky that usually I'm able to get kind of the top dogs. And I wanted to talk to all of them because I wanted to have an education for people that are aspiring to be songwriters that could read these books and understand not just the backstories of these people personally, but then how their real life experiences were the muse for many of the songs that they wrote that became the soundtrack to country music fans' lives through multiple generations. And at the same time, the digital kind of influence that started to come in the last 10 years and reshape production, where it used to be, always live off a floor, session band, 3-4 songs in a day, which is remarkable in and of itself, and a lot of times still goes on. Darius Rucker told Frank Rogers, who's in the book, Brad Paisley's longtime producer, when he first got to town here to do a country record, they got 3 songs or 4 songs done in an afternoon. 3 of them were number 1. Wow. And he looked at him with his jaw dropped on the floor, and he says, man, when we were doing drum sound, recording for Hootie, it takes us a day just to get drum sound. So it shows, so it gives you a sort of, so that's one thing. So anyway, leading up to this book, the idea was, my dog died in 2018. My longtime dog, Annie, and I was just heartbroken, and I just couldn't, it was like losing a human, a family member. So I said, I got to pull myself out of this, so I thought, well, let's go ahead and just try to put some lines in the water. And I had from the National Songwriter 2 book already interviewed Shane McNally and Josh Osborne well, not yet. They were coming up, but I had some names on that list that I knew were going to be late editions that would be in both books. The long story short, though, is you always, when you're trying out a new book, you have to approach 4 or 5 or 6 opening ball producers. And so I was fortunate in that Dave Cobb, who I'm a huge fan of course, produces Chris Stapleton and Jason Isbell and Sturgill Simpson and Shooter Jennings and the Star is Born soundtrack. He was the first producer to sign on to this. And it was flattering in a couple of senses because he had a few of my books in his studio, including the Rick Rubin in the studio, which is still one of our best sellers. And one of the behind the boards ones. And nice. I thought, that's really cool. Well, it let me know that this books are reaching the people that need to be reading them. Yeah. Because even if it's a reference guide, I'm not going to go as far as saying, oh, my book was a reference guide for Dave Cobb. But I mean, the fact that other studios I've worked out of in this town and seen them, and I don't ever mention it. I don't go, oh, I wrote that. I just like knowing it's there. Is the fact that somebody can open that book, and if they want to go, hey, what kind of drum did Andy Johns use on the when the levee break session at Stonehenge? They can actually look that up and go, oh, it was blah blah blah, and oh, it was 10 feet away, and oh, they only used so you can use these books as a reference guide. But I wanted that for country, and I wanted it to be as definitive as possible. So fortunately, like Nathan Chapman, Taylor Swift's early producer signed on, and then Paul Worley, bless his heart, signed on, and Norbert Putnam, and it just started from there. And once word of mouth kind of spreads a little bit, then I started luckily getting like, hey man, you ought to talk to blah, blah, blah. And so Josh Leo put me in touch with like Jim Ed Norman, who hates interviews, but agreed to do one. A lot of, the cool thing about this series is they know that this, what I promised every one of the guys in this book was that I would this would not be a fluff piece. This would be a real, some of these chapters are 45 pages long. Tony Brown's chapter is 45 pages. Byron Gallimore's chapter is 43 pages. Byron Gallimore, of course, has been with Tim McGraw since he was an unknown. And the importance of that is it shows you, I think those lengths of chapters speak for themselves, because not only, first of all, you're hearing most of that from the producer, not me. There's narrative there, but you get Byron's backstory as a musician himself, as many of these producers started out, and it's an important lesson they emphasize over and over about play an instrument. Even if you can sort of play it, or barely play it, because it's just going to relatability wise and the respect you'll get from the session players when you try to tell them you want them to do something, if you can show them, anyway. A lot of the guys in this book started out that way. Tony Brown was Elvis's piano player and then played with the Oak Ridge Boys and a bunch of people as he started learning the ropes. Norbert Putnam was Elvis's bass player. So there's some cool Elvis stories in the book. But then like Frank Rogers was a guitar player. Jeff Stevens moved here to be a star and actually got a deal, but wound up getting a songwriting deal. And then that led to meeting Luke Bryan and producing him. And so you have Luke Bryan's whole career, and you have Jody Stevens, his son. You have Ross Copperman, who started out really young as an artist. Jimmy Robbins, who started out as an artist. And Chris DiStefano and guys like Luke Laird, who were like today's big hit makers. And these guys, from Casey Musgraves to Carrie Underwood. So what you also get in these chapters, though, is you not only get their personal backstories, the advice about how hard it was to get to town, what they had to do to get their foot in the door, but then they take you inside the recording studio in the writing room with the actual stars that record these songs.
Wow.
And in a lot of cases co-write them. And as a fan, if you're really not the academic side and you don't really fully want to know like what an RE20 is and when it sits on a kick drum, why it gets the sound it gets, you can still really get a 3D look at how your favorite country stars recorded their biggest number ones and maybe your favorite hits in the studio. So it just hopefully gives a really cool 3D view to how that process works. And then the other thing that it does that I hope is important is for those who are interested in, becoming record producers, whatever, you get the number of people in this book. James Stroud, I mean, God, that guy's a legend. I mean, you got everybody from Toby Keith to Willie Nelson there. You have, Josh Osborne and Shane McNally for Casey Musgraves. Paul Worley. I mean, you're going to go Dixie Chicks, I guess they're Lady A now, Lady Antebellum, Lady A.
Right.
Ban Perry, Big and Rich. So it goes on, but what you kind of get out of the 600 pages of this book, the long book, Ray Baker, Merle Haggard, and those great Freddie Powers songs from back in the 80s that they made together, and Mo Stamp, Joe Stampy and Mo Bandy and that 70s honky tonk movement. George Strait's producer, Tony Brown. Dan Huff is in this book. That was another early sign on that it was just such an honor. I mean, some of these guys, I'm a fan of all of them, but some of them, you revere like you should. Clint Black opened his studio for 3 hours, and we talked about his whole catalog. Buddy Cannon, I did a very long interview with, so we decided that the Forward was the best option just in terms of that advice. So you get really like every major country star's producers in this book. Frank Liddell, if you want the Miranda Lambert history. Don Cook, if you want Brooks and Dunn. Bobby Braddock, if you want Blake Shelton. So you really, hopefully Zach Crowell, if you want Sam Hunt, or, Jesse Frazier, if you want Thomas Rhett. I mean, I could go on and on. Michael Knox, if you want Jason Aldean. And that was another thing I would really emphasize here that's kind of cool. This book gives you a real insight into the camaraderie of these producers that start out, like, say, Michael Knox did with Jason Aldean, and for 15 years, and how many, tens of millions of albums and number one sold. Those guys have been a team. Byron Gallimore and as I mentioned before, and Missy Gallimore, his wife, who signs a lot of these songs, and Tim McGraw, Kenny Chesney and Buddy, Cannon, or Luke Bryan and the Stevens father-son team. So Frank Rogers and Brad Paisley. So it really gives you kind of that look at how tightly knit the relationship often is between a producer and star, and that's really remarkable because that doesn't happen a lot in other genres. You know, you get people that work for a certain period of time with an artist, and then it's time to move on to, you know, another one, and that happens in country, but not nearly as much. And when it does happen, it's never an ugly, angry thing. At least in what I'm told by these people firsthand from the horse's mouth. It's, hey man, good luck with that. You know, and then there's some funny ones in there about like Keith Urban, I should mention, you know, Nathan Chapman and Dan Huff kind of swapped places on Taylor Swift's record on Red. And then Keith wanted to work with Nathan and sort of told Dan, hey, I'm going to go over here for a little bit. And so they had a friendly call, like, you know, kind of thing. I mean, so I think the other thing that's really cool is about the friendly competition. I'm just trying to get all this out in that one answer, so just to cover that. And I'll shut up, I promise. But the camaraderie as well of as these guys, as competitive as it is, there's a camaraderie, genuine camaraderie there, as well as I've gotten to know most of these people over the years and re-interviewed them. And I would have heard these stories even if I didn't include them in the book. And there's just not that many. There's just not the same animus and cutthroat sort of ugliness to other genres in the music business I've written about intimately that that are
right.
I mean, I was the Death Row Chronicles biographer of record for the BET, that 6-part Death Row thing off the Suge Knight book. And I mean, you can watch that and he tells you himself. I mean, there's some ugly violence that in other genres was just part of the culture, street culture that kind of came into the studio. And I mean, it's less so like that today, but there's just Wild West stories you don't hear in country because it was just a little bit more friendly of a business model.
Well, and I think
and town.
Well, yeah, that's kind of the thing that I wanted to talk about, and I think that kind of transitions into this theme, and I think it all centers around Nashville as a whole. I think Nashville as a whole has something very, very special in this music industry. And do you think that Nashville? Because I mean, there are other genres recording here in Nashville, but I think that same studio environment exists for country music that it might in those other studios. What do you think? What is it about Nashville specifically, and what does Nashville bring to the table that kind of creates this environment?
Well, for instance, if you're an artist, you're walking into a house a lot of times to work on new music instead of an intimidating office building with a sort of, you know, soulless.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to insult anybody, but there's a lot of writing rooms, and if you're a professional, you could get it done on the side of the road or in a garage or in a writing room or wherever. But when you have these inviting kind of hometown feel houses where a lot of the creation goes on, you know, there are corporate studios here, but even Sony's writing house is like this charming old brick, you know, house over there. My office used to be right next door to it, in fact, on Music Square West. So, I mean, you have that element of it sort of disarms anybody from feeling like, now at the same token, they're not giving record, you know, deals out at the airport. But it's got a lot more. I'm sort of ripping off Swingers there, but John Favreau's line at the end of the movie. But yeah, but I mean, it's a business that's a little bit more quaint, a little bit more welcoming, and you know, you have writers' rounds, and you can, you know, this stuff gets harder to do. But as the city gets bigger, and they can't be as much that way. But traditionally with writers' rounds, you can show up at writers' round and you're going to play the last slot for the first couple of months, but you can hang out and talk with people and they might hear your songs and get co-writes out of it. And the National Songwriter Book emphasizes the importance of that. But I mention that because the accessibility factor is what matters there, because a new writer can get here. It's more expensive than it used to be. And also, like, another bookend of that answer is that it used to be a very, very affordable town. I've paid $1,250 a month in New York for a apartment half the size with none of the amenities. When I moved here, it was $450 a month for one bedroom with air condition and a dishwasher and cable in or out and stuff that was like, wow, I can actually have like a quality of life as a musician and work full time in that business. And I think that's still here. It's a little bit more, it's more expensive now, and you definitely have more competition. But see, that's another thing that I have to go back to the book, but that we really try to give you. You really get a real honest education on, you know, how competitive this town is and how hard it is to, it's easier to live here than it is to make it here, but your chances of making it here are stronger, exponentially stronger Now, and that's another thing. Some of the guys in this book are examples of people who started out coming here to be a star and wound up finding their footing, their actual destiny, whatever you want to call it, was more to be, say, a songwriter.
Yeah.
Because that's where they found their success. And success is ultimately going to dictate what you do for a living in the music business. If you're a bass player and you're actually better at the behind the scenes of sounding, recording the band, doing the PA, that's a signal that you might want to explore some studio side work,
Yeah.
even as a runner so what I'm saying is, if you find you have an ear for something that doesn't exactly initially align with your dream of being the next whomever, country star, you might still have a really great career as a producer or a songwriter, and then eventually you can make your way, like Shane McNally started out as a aspiring recording star. He made one album in 2000, and it's the last you ever heard of that, but you sure heard of him.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, and not only does he have Songland now, but he's also, he has Smack with Josh Osborne. Josh Osborne, there's a touching part in the book that talks about his parents, and, I used to drive him as a teenager like other parents might drive a kid to their gymnastic events or their sporting events. He went to Nashville and he went to Dollywood, and they drove him everywhere to play. They were school teachers. And
wow.
So my point is, that guy started coming to town here, and he grew up on the Kentucky Music Highway. Well, his name's now on it. So, I mean, you find your footing here if you stay. That's the other thing I'd say. Nashville, for a long time, was a town that gave you enough breathing room. You're going to get frustrated with the rejection that comes in any town. I've lived in New York, LA, and Nashville, so I can attest to this personally. To a certain degree, you are going to run into rejection anywhere, but Nashville was a place that had a little bit more of a kind of, not you suck, get out of here, but more of a like
right.
Songwriters that get development deals instead of outright publishing deals. So there might be someone that says, man, I can't tell you, your voice ain't great, but you sure are a great lead guitar player. Have you ever thought about just focusing on being a lead player? Maybe a couple years later, they find themselves on the road with some star. Cole Swindell, who was in the second National Songwriter book, started out as Luke Bryan's T-shirt merch guy. You know what I mean? So you what we really try to do, what I try to punctuate in this book as much as anything else, and the National Songwriter series, because they're kind of synonymous to each other in the style of the chapters, and that is to really emphasize the accidental happy accidents, and that's even from people's careers. Sometimes how songs get written or started. You start down one road and you wind up down another.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that there's a lot of really cool stories in this book from the producers about certain songs that kind of, like, there's a great story. I'll tell you guys one funny story here that this is sort of the LA influence into Nashville. So Tony Brown started out working for Jimmy Bowen at MCA, and then he ascended to that same position as president. And at the same time, he was producing George Strait, and the guy this guy was as busy as James Stroud was. And James Stroud in like 1990 did like 100 records. So these guys, that shows you how fast the Nashville machine moves in the studio. And you have to be able to go, and you have to be able to go through those lower down positions, or starting out in sessions or starting out live. You have to be able to show up at the studio if you want to be a musician in this town, and on first take get a keeper one. You have to know the number system.
Yep.
You have to know a lot of those things. So a lot of these producers started out there, and it gave them the education. Not only, and they joke in the book, but factually they say, I'm not going to say no names, but I work for some great producers and I work for some not so great producers. And so you get that education that they share, but they also talk about so Tony Brown ascends through Elvis playing piano, keyboards for Elvis, last single. He makes it somehow to Nashville, to the session world. He kind of starts out, but he's not really feeling that, but he starts to get a leg in the A&R side and finds back his calling and doing signing artists. And there's some great stories in this book about artists that were signed by these guys when they were record executives / producers. It's fascinating. But jump ahead to 1997, and Con Air is getting ready. You guys remember that movie, right? With Nicolas Cage. Yeah. Mega movie. Made $1 billion, I think, or something worldwide. Crazy successful movie. So there's a song in that movie called How Do I Live that everybody initially thought Leanne Rimes did, the both versions that are played in the movie. But there's a movie version that opens the movie, and then there's one that ends it. And they had the one that opened it with Leanne Rimes, but they didn't have one that ended it. So 2 days before it was due, Tony Brown talks about being in L.A. and getting taken over to Jerry Bruckheimer's office at like 11 at night. And Jerry Bruckheimer says, plays him the scene in the movie with the Vegas airplane crash, and he plays the "How Do I Live," or he plays "Power of Love" by Celine Dion. He says, "This is the song I want your song to sound like." I guess he wanted like a pop counterpart, sort of. So Tony Brown says, "Okay, great. What do I have? Like a week?" He says, "No, I need a Tuesday." he says, "Okay." He says, "Well, I got to fly back tonight." And he says, "You know who would kill this is Trisha Yearwood." So Trisha Yearwood, so they have a whole thing he describes where Jerry Bruckheimer is patched in from Los Angeles from a line in at the studio where he can actually be part of the session. And he's listening as Tony's producing and listening to Trisha Yearwood's take, and then they do another one, and it goes through this whole. It was really like a little action movie in the studio.
Wow!
About how this song is brought to life in 2 days. And I mean, they did a string section that Dan Huck's father put together at the last section. And, so when you hear, that's the thing, like you hear these finished songs, people. It's important. They wouldn't necessarily know any better. So I don't mean to say people don't have any idea, but the whole point of this book is to help you get an idea, and not only get an idea. And I hope you include this part of what I'm saying if you edit this down at all, because that's an important point. Not to tell you what to use, but this is a really quintessential point in this book. Is it shows the work ethic, man. It shows you how hard these guys work. And you might say, well, 3 songs in a day, that don't sound like it took that much work. He's like, dude, that's because they've become such master craftsmen, and their session players they use are master craftsmen of such a level, an elite level, that they can play 3 songs in an afternoon and they all be number ones. In fact, another Tony Brown story, he talked about George Strait. There used to be a saying, and in the National Songwriter book you hear it called a McGraw cut, because McGraw ascended to kind of the George Strait position in the millennium. Right. So George Strait in the 80s and 90s, and still in the millennium, there was a thing called the George Strait cut. Man, I'd love to get a straight cut. Love to get a straight cut. Love to get a straight cut. So when songwriters would submit songs, and I think Tony said, and like Jason Aldean's producer said, these guys send 2,000-3,000 songs they go through before they pick the 15 that make the record.
Yeah. So
think about the averages. Like, so the session players for George Strait songs, the songwriters used to start hiring the actual session players from George Strait's records to play on the demos. Because their rationale was George Strait would hear it and go, "Hey, I like that," and then they'd be like, in the studio, they'd be like, "Fellas, that sounds just like the demo," and they'd let him know, "Well, George, we actually played on that." And so you know what I mean? That's just a little sampling, but there's all kinds of cool stories about it. Just man, I'm proud of this book from the point of view that it. It consumed 16 weeks of my life writing it, because I line up everything, and then I just sit down and write the whole thing in one sitting. And it was, I think I have 1,000 hours in writing this thing in the 4 months that we did. And then we did another 2 months editing. And at the same time I was recording the audiobook, which is 2 volumes through Blackstone. It's going to be out July 1st, I think, or 5th for the 4th weekend. But it comes out in early July, and then later July, the 2nd volume drops. But that's, there's probably 35, 40 hours of there. Probably will keep 30 of it, but it gives you a sense of how in-depthly we tried to go to give the full picture. And really, I hate to say this, but I'm proud to say it kind of for the first time. It's not been a book like this out before, that took all these producers and got them together in one book to talk as in-depthly on their own personal backstories, the intimate details of the stars they work with, maybe some of their early on confidence gaps that were made up through the, albums they made together, first records that didn't do well. And then the other thing I really try to do is in every chapter, and I source them, I'll pull a Taylor Swift quote where I can find one that talks about working with Nathan, or I'll pull Michael Knox and Jason Aldean back and forth in a conversation. So as you're reading, you feel like you're sitting there in the studio anyway, but then you sometimes feel like, wow, I'm right there with them as they're. And we do that more successfully in National Songwriter to some degree because I get the actual firsthand commentary from all the songwriters. But we try to give you, and the other thing that I try to do, not a ton, but artfully in this book, where I can, is, Country Weekly was just such a cool, they have Nash Country Daily now, but Country Weekly was an institution for decades. So there's certain times where I'll quote a reviewer, because I want to try to give readers a sense of that town in the 80s or in the 90s, or when Great American Country did record reviews and things like this. So you also get kind of almost like a class history thing without it being boring, because you have these references that I'll try to use and weave in and out occasionally that are from like the actual, finger on the pulse at the time, what the town was feeling about this record, what the buzz was on it. If it went to number one that first week, we give you the Billboard stats. We give you all of it's in there. So hopefully it covers the A to Z as thoroughly as we could, barring a couple inevitable spelling. Someone's like, my roadie Buford man spells his name with an O instead of a U. So sorry, but we try to be as, and all the producers were given the opportunity, and most of them went through and vetted these chapters personally. So really all of what you're reading has been really vetted personally up to the finish line by these guys. So it's you can trust the accuracy of it. I suppose that's what I'm trying to say.
That's awesome. And I want to talk about how, you talk about the experience of how they can, better experience not just the reading, but also the audio. I think you have a special way that they can experience.
You string along while you read. It's awesome.
Yeah. So
it's cool.
What was the idea behind that?
I didn't invent it. It came along with the advent of streaming in the last few years. And I say advent because iTunes, think about the limitations of iTunes when you have to pay for every song you listen to. So in other words, like if I really want to, I'm really digging reading about the energy of a certain session band, and man, you can feel that in the song. Well, I want to go listen to that song right there. And I don't want to have to pay 99 cents to listen to 30 seconds of something. If I want to jump to that middle chorus I love and hear it again, I can do that.
Yep.
If I want to then on the next page, some of these guys jump around. There's some that are legacy, but there's some that work with a lot of artists. Okay, now I want to do Luke Bryan's, Kick the Dust Up, because there's like a 30-second intro, and then the soundscape for that song took them 5 weeks. Some of them they do in an afternoon. Well, shoot, I don't know what 5 weeks sounds like. You go right there. If you want to play it again, which is of course my favorite Luke Bryan song, you can hear, because I'm a big fan of Jody Stevens and his programming work.
Right.
He worked on that for ages. So it gives you the ability to go back to 1970 and listen to, Mo Bandy, the Rodeo Clown in 74, or jump to 2020 and listen to, whomever, the Lady Gaga Star is Born soundtrack. And as Dave Cobb is talking about, if you want to hear Chris Stapleton, Tennessee Whiskey, you want to read about, how that sound was created, you can do those synonymously and synchronized at the same time without having to have any kind of delayed kind of engagement factor, I guess, right? And if you can have something, when I say 3D, that's what I mean. If you can listen to something and read about it at the same time, and then maybe visualize it in your mind, I mean, that's as close as we're going to get. You know what I mean? To creating that. I mean, it's left to them, and hopefully the stories are good. But and equally, if you don't want to listen, if you want to watch. If you really want to watch, the music video, because you might have grown up with that song watching CMT, you can put the music video on and then, go back to reading. I mean, there's a nostalgic element that I really work. No more than anybody else. I'm just saying, for my standards, I really try nostalgically to be as sort of authentic and visual as possible. And you have to do that when you're writing a book through other means than visuals, because you can't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So using those tools, and I mean, because otherwise I'd say, yeah, man, pull out your McGraw tape if it was 1980s. Pull out your McGraw CD here. Well, you might have to go dust that off from your attic, or if you can now. Oh, and another tool that I within watching it, YouTube.
Right.
Because we have over 150 videos on YouTube, all on the Jake Brown Books channel. Which just happenstance to it. It's a lot of the producers from the book talking about their individual hits on video. So if you are more of a visual person and you want to just listen, you're not so much of a reader, or even with the audiobook, if you like the audiobook, but you want to take a little break now and then from listening to me, I read these books, you can go and watch the producers tell you right from the horse's mouth, and you don't have to even have me involved in it. I'm saying that self-effacingly because I read the audiobooks I write. But so there's multiple. And I have a great publicity team, Samantha Downey and Dead Horse Branding and Baker and Taylor's, Blackstone. The companies involved in this book, all of us sought to try to give you as many different platforms. And part of that would have happened anyway, but with the COVID thing and the fact that, like I was explaining before we started talking, with the retail side of being a little bit, staggered because of the stores being closed, we really tried to make this as digital a book as I've ever done. Because I've always had those kinds of videos. We do those to promote the National Songwriter books, but
right.
We put them all up versus, select this and that. And so you can overdose on this as much as you are a country fan and want to read or listen or watch or whatever. And that's the other thing. And I take no offense to it. I almost prefer it. Except when I'm used as an R. Kelly, I like being a source. So for there's some of these books wind up on Wikipedia as sources for these other articles, and like the National Songwriter,
that's
the Rolling
cool.
Stone placement. Yeah, that was one of my Rolling Stone placements. Stephen Betts did a Aretha Franklin article, and there was a song she sang from one of the country artists, and they used the book as a reference. So my point is, that's what they're supposed to be as much as they are anything definitive. If you're only interested in jumping around and reading about different songs, and do that. With the digital version, with the ebook that's out now, you can jump to any chapter and any page. It's really, we tried to make it as integrated as possible with the ADD that I have and most people do to watching one thing or listening to one thing. You know what I mean? Because,
yeah, absolutely.
That's the other thing. If you're running with your phone or you're on the bike or you're this and that, and you want to just jump around, you can do that with this book pretty fluidly. I guess it's sort of what I'm trying to explain.
That's awesome, Jake. Quick thing. Let's go back to producers real quick. What do you believe the role of a producer has on an artist's success?
Well, it's pretty broad ranging. In country music, a producer will tell you within the A&R, which is artist and repertoire responsibilities of any producer, picking the songs is probably second only to the actual recording of them. And they're usually pretty synonymous. So like, as I mentioned, a lot of times these demos come in pretty fully formed. In fact, a lot of the producers on this, about a third of them in the book, came in with the bed track, which would be your instrumental, before they even started writing that day in some cases. And then what you hear on the radio is what they did in their studio, sometimes their basement studio,
Yeah.
So it's changed a lot. But a lot of times picking the songs is obviously a big one. And that's typically, that vests with the producer typically, or with the producer and artist, obviously. But a lot of times the artists, if they're new especially, or they know the producer's a bigger name and they're going to get pitched the better songs first, they're going to defer to the producer. Another thing that really is within the essence of that description of that job duty list is definitely the session bands that the producers pick. Session bands in Nashville do 2 and 3 sessions a day. I mean, right now the shutdowns made that harder, but traditionally, these guys come in from 9 to 11 to knock out, so many sides for somebody, and then they're going in from 1 to 3 to do another, and maybe from 4 to 6 to do another.
Yep.
And sometimes they play on 300 songs a year. So producers got to have that session band dialed in. They've got to have the sounds dialed in as well. So an engineer, a lot of times producer's not an engineer. A lot of times they are, but a lot of times they're not. So the engineer that they choose is huge. If they pick an engineer that has, like Justin Niebank is in this book, I will proudly say I worked hard to get him because he's the top mixing engineer in country. I would say about 50% of what you hear coming out of the last 20 years of the country Billboard charts he mixed. That could be even a conservative estimate. It could be, some years it could be higher. I mean, he had years where it was probably, his ears touched a lot of it. So, think at the rate and pace he's got to work at. And so, the ability to have a really good engineer from the recording side, your mixing engineer, keeping the label around, but not in the way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So you're going to have someone paying for this, and they're going to want to come by and see how their investment's sounding. So you can't be like, get the hell out of here. Whereas an example, I've had rock producers and hip hop producers, like Death Row used to have kind of a gun-toting policy at their studio, and the height of that thing. And if the wrong record guy came in, Jimmy Iovine could come in there anytime he wanted, but you hear stories of engineers getting beat down for winding a tape too far for Tupac. So,
oh wow!
I mean, that doesn't happen in country, but the same expectation level of first take, keeper take, and that's how it happens. Sometimes that there's a rule that all of these producers say: record the warm up. Sometimes your warm up is your take.
Yep.
And then, the ability to comp, the ability to, okay, now this is another thing within that job description. Playing an instrument, while not a requirement, is exceptionally important in being able to articulate to a session band what you want something to sound like. And then, guys like Buddy Cannon, who's just an iconic, esteemed member of this record-making community. I mean, God, he does Willie Nelson and Kenny Chesney alone. Those are, just... And he said, I like to wait until a group of guys is in a room together. He said, I would rather hear some demos come fully produced, really. Right. He said, I just as soon hear it on an acoustic guitar because I want the session band to sit there in a circle. And Paul Worley took this approach as well. And listen and let it come to life organically. And then they record it right there. Paul Worley is an exceptionally talented lead guitar player, played on like Dan Huff is. And those guys have played on pretty much every hit that they produced. And so that's also important. With being a producer, again, know an instrument, man. If you can, know 4 or 5 of them. Know how to record in Logic. Know how to record in Pro Tools. Know how to record in 2-inch reel tape to tape if you need it. Yeah. Know how to generate an analog. That's the thing. An artist, a lot of times, producers have to be translators. They wear so many hats and they're so underappreciated. For the psychologist, they have to be 1 minute with a sort of insecure, new to town artist that's got to be coached through a vocal delivery, and then other times they have to be a translator of an artist saying, "Man, I'm hearing this, but I'm not getting it from the band," and he has to then take what they're not hearing and translate it to the band. You know what I mean? Oh, so yeah. There's just so many balls these guys juggle. I prefer hats to wear because they wear so many of them simultaneously. So that's really the job description: is you're part psychologist, you're part translator, you're part, demonstrator in the sense that you play an instrument, you're part creator, you're part editor. It's also your job as a producer to be able to stand up to a big superstar and say, you know what, I don't think that one's the keeper, man. I think we can do that better. Yeah, absolutely. You hear a lot of that in this book, a lot of it. And you hear a lot of it with humor, but with firmness too, where you get the impression that if it was Tim McGraw or if it was Luke Bryan or if it was any big name person, they know they're paying that producer to be there to be the one to tell them they can do it better. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're now in an age, and we've been in this age for a little while, where anybody can have access to this information, record anywhere, and get their music out to anybody they want to at any time, right? So we're in this age, but yet still it comes down to Nashville. People are recording in Nashville. The session musicians are in Nashville. People are still finding their dreams in Nashville. Why do you think that is still today when we have this big age of internet? And do you think it will always be that way?
Well, I'll tell you my opinion. I'm certainly no authority on it past my informed opinion, just from the point of view that I hear a lot of different, standpoints on it from people that have been here a long time and people that come here and find this place as their home. And I'm one of them. Just in the sense that I came here from another place, my case, New York. A lot of the people that I know here came from LA, and it just is sort of anyone. So the fact that your point there, anyone can do it on the internet means anyone can do it, right? And that's not always a good thing if you want to be taken serious. No, I mean, just being real. Right, yeah. If you want to be a credible country star, you have to have you have to. Any independent artist that started out on the web, Big Smo had Kicking It in Tennessee. It hit 13 million views before he signed to Warner Brothers. So yes, that song helped him get out from the underground and bubble up. But without Warner Brothers, he wouldn't have become a household name in the A&E show. Just one example. He's in the book along with Ray Riddle, his engineer, and it tells that story. But you have to have. I just signed a songwriting deal. I moved here 18 years ago. I have a very big record catalog through a lot of the groups I produce, and I wrote a lot of that stuff. There's more rock and alternative stuff. But my point is, it took me 18 years to get a publishing deal. I had some crappy offers, and I worked a lot in that. But I'm just one example, and I'm not even anywhere near what I'm talking about here. And that's just to have the satisfaction of knowing my songs were like good enough for that. But they're never going to be hits. But I still love music and make it here. So another reason I think Nashville, for people that come here and wind up doing other things where they find their footing. If they wanted to be a star, maybe they wind up a songwriter. They wanted to be songwriter, maybe they wound up a producer. They wanted to be a session player, a band player. They wound up, I mean, you just don't know where this town's going to lead you. But if you move here and you stay here long enough, I'll tell you, when I first moved here in 2003, I already had my distro deal. I had a couple books out. So I had stuff going on, but this town has given me my career. And I say that really appreciatively, but I'm saying, like, it took years. I was told when I first got here, this is a 5-year town. Well, I had so many people say that to me in that great accent because 5-year town, 5-year town. Well, 5 years doesn't just fly by. 5 years is, maybe in New York it does, but 5 years here is like eternity. And so you have to find things to do within that 5 years that are not just going to be like, you have to have a plan. You have to come here and have a focus and an energy, and you have to. So I think, like, once you've done that, okay, you've been here 5 years and you start to have success. Well, now you're going to stay another 5. Yep. And then before you know it, you've been here 10. So it just becomes your home. And it becomes your home also because in Los Angeles, especially, it's just a seedy, nasty, dirty town. I'm sorry, it just is. It's just a dirty, dirty, dirty place. There's some good people there, but most of the people I talk to that leave there never want to go back there other than to work.
Yeah.
And so, but where you come to Nashville, even if people who leave it and come back there, if they're on the road, for instance, you might come here and wind up touring a lot of the year. But when you get back here, you can't wait to get back here. And then there's just a really nice sort of, like I said, Music Row it's changing now with some of these stupid condo buildings, but it's mostly houses or really quaint studios, and people are really friendly. You have BMI ASCAP and CSAC all within 3 blocks of each other for songwriting associations. You have the National Songwriter Association International. So you have local places you can just get off the bus, so to speak, and walk into if you're new to town and say, hey, man, I'm a songwriter. I'm just trying to get some direction, and you can get it. There's also Belmont University, just to shout out Belmont. If you're a college kid, you go to college anywhere and take a music business program. Don't come here. Yeah. It's more competitive, but you do the internships alone. Jesse Frazier is a pretty big name these days. He started out at Belmont, and I'm actually using his quote from the chapter in the book. He said, you're basically paying 4 years for an internship. Right. Because that internship is really going to get your foot in the door and get you your daily exposure to the record business that's happening. And Belmont also, it's one of the best recruiting sources for future country stars and executives. But conversely, it's also one of the best sources if you want to go, and this doesn't even have to be a 4-year degree. If you just want to take a class, say on record production or songwriting or music administration or the publishing business, you can go back. They have one of the best staffs, the Mike Kerb School of Business, and Jim Ed Norman runs that. You can get more education in that $500 class or $1,000 class for so many weeks with that professor who used to be who is Paul Worley, or who is someone else, or who might be a really seasoned executive that brings in great guest speakers. So the educational slant, Tennessee State University has a great one. Vanderbilt, not so much, but they have their classes. I mean, anywhere you go in this town, there's an education waiting for you, whether you're interning, whether you're working, starting out, and that's the other thing, the work ethic here, I think continues to bring people back because you're always surrounded by people who are working hard. It may be laid back, but they work their asses off here. People come here off the farm, man. I mean, some of the songwriters in fact, Byron Gallimore, great example off from the book, Tim McGraw's producer, came to Nashville when he was 30, and he'd been a farmer since he was 15. He played music on the weekends. Wow. Yeah. I mean, so you really just have I don't know, it's such an authentic sort of crossroads of so many different people that came from other cities that treated them like garbage, and they got here and said, your stuff sucks. You're never going to make it. Get out of here. The other thing I would say that makes Nashville continue to be such a draw is the live scene. Now, obviously, COVID shutdown affected that, but traditionally, this is one of the most, 24-hour exciting live towns, especially Broadway. Yeah. Mostly tourists go down there, but that's still people come to town and get their start down there. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can see music here from 10, 11 in the morning till 3, 4 in the morning. And it's country for the most part, but that's what people come to hear. Well, if you're a new songwriter or you're a new guitar player and you're lucky enough to get one of those live gigs, you can not only make a living, but you meet a lot of people. You get a chance to know how to interact with an audience. if you're a songwriter and you start doing writers rounds, it would be at Commodore's or be it, over on West End or any of the local places. You were asking me earlier about local places. So I used to play a place called Beyond the Edge in East Nashville. I was in a bunch of different sort of singer-songwriter groups of girls that would sing, and I'd write most of the stuff. And, Spring Water and, Spring Water over there on West End and Commodore's. And these are lower level writer round. Anyone can get in. Eddie's, what was that place called? Oh, there's Bob's Idle Hour over there on, that's moved now, but it's still on Music Row.
Right.
So there are places, there's places to come here. And even if you're never going to make it, but you want to feel like a part of it, like you're a truck driver and you just get up in that writer's round and play that. I heard this guy play an angry song one time about his bee wife who, I'm going to kick her to the curb. It's stuff that would never fly now, and not many people clap, but he got something out of it. And he packed up his guitar after playing that one song, and he stormed off stage in his boots and out the door, and he thought, well, he got that out of this system. But he had the forum to do that. Well, but there's but country, don't forget, man, the other reason that I think Nashville has remained such a kind of nerve center of not just this genre, but songwriting as a kind of epicenter. But you think of songwriter, you say Nashville, is the fact that so many, the real lives of the listener are captured in the 3 or 4 minutes of a country song, unlike no other genre in music, period. And that's just inarguable, because so many of the sales numbers bear it out. And people could say, yeah, man, but sales don't matter. Well, actually they do, because they reflect the amount of people listening to that genre at any given time versus their competition. So even though, you go to a club and you talk to people, out in the country, the more small towns where people play that country set at 11 o'clock when they're breaking their set down, they're putting on the club songs. And that's where a lot of these guys that started doing tracks first got their ideas. It's like, man, the same fans that like, Tim McGraw, like Lil Wayne. So, and that led to the birth of country rap in a sense conceptually, but it also opened the door for This Is How We Roll by Florida Georgia Line, or, Play It Again by Luke Bryan, or these sort of songs where people started, not so much like even when Big and Rich kind of was doing it before anyone, but when with the Save a Horse Ride a Cowboy and those records.
Right.
Well, in Cowboy Troy, but I mean, hip hop, but I mean, just really, truly, like where country can maintain. I was talking about this yesterday on an interview with somebody. I think, country has maintained its core fundamental pillars, or the listeners who just tune out. But it's allowed itself to still, underneath those acoustic guitars and those story-driven vocals, you're going to hear really some of the most top programming in the world. I mean, hip hop programming that would be competitive with this at a number one level. Do you know what I mean? Where some of the guys doing these programming could be off doing that. Or Jay Joyce does a lot of pop stuff and will kind of dip into country now and then. Before he died, bless his heart, he was on our list. Busby with Maren Morris, was a master of that. So you and a lot of others, Joey Moy, who started out as Nickelback's co-producer. So, I mean, you also have a lot of people that come to Nashville, I think, from other genres. And though they might still do those other genres, they just are happiest here because they can have hybrids that, A, make them more money and B, and so I've heard, and B, give them a little bit more of a kind of place to call home, I guess, for lack of a cheesier way to put it. As a musician, as a producer, as a songwriter, or as a family, they might be able to afford a house here that, size-wise, they'd never be able to afford back in Los Angeles. I mean, you hear about, or especially New York, my God, or Atlanta even.
Well, do you think that,
for all those reasons?
Do you think this is going to, is Nashville's future going to be more of this, more studios, more genres coming into Nashville, or do you think Nashville just kind of has what it's best at, and it's going to kind of stay within that, or do you? It's always
going to stay country, dude. Yeah, I mean, you have Jack White here, and you have Kings of Leon. You have some different groups, not Kings of Leon, but what's that other? There's been some. There's a great rock scene here, indie rock scene here.
Yeah.
But Los Angeles will, I think, always be the rock capital. I don't know what New York anymore. You really call. I guess it's the dance hip hop capital, and EDM, there's never going to be Branson is great for older country artists. It's given a home to a lot of people that couldn't have played here anymore, just with the new crowd coming in to the same capacity, and they can do that there. But yeah, it'll always be here. Country music's home is Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry is here, even though the Grand Ole Opry is really Lyman. But the Opry that is now out at Opryland, the second generation of Opryland, I guess you call it.
Right.
All the traditions that are here are going to stay here, I think, and they're going to get influenced, stylistically. But you're also seeing right now, like kind of with Clint Black, we talked about the Season of the National Songwriter 3 book too. Like on both ends of that spectrum, I was asking about '90s country, and it's sort of going into kind of its legacy, golden Vogue kind of era, where it's like Brooks and Dunn had a huge amount of press last year, and kind of a little bit of a celebration of what they did to lay the groundwork, and others, etc. So, I don't. This place is just a country town, and that's the thing too. With people that move here, they have to remember that like this is the South, dude. Like this is this is Trump country. I mean, as much as I hate to say it, as much as it's Obama country, it's definitely, once you get into the city, it's got a very vibrant cultural. I don't want to make it sound that way, but what I mean is the country. You're not taking the country out of Nashville. Does that
right?
make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
most definitely.
You know what I'm saying? Even I would say 60 to 70% of the music they record in this city is exported out to the rural surroundings, and they're not going to suddenly go tell those people, not in any way, shape, or form, that they don't want to hear what to do. And mostly, what people want to hear in country music is sort of a kind of a positive memory message, or a inspirational message, or a spiritual one. The other thing I think that in this book we tried to very respectfully touch upon. It more happens in the National Songwriter Series just because of the Christian songwriting community. But, man, like the Christian songwriting community
it's
and
huge.
I mean, and it's its own world. I mean, that's why I didn't try to really get into it in this book, because it would require its own book.
Yes.
And yes, to use that word, it's enormous. And this is what I'm getting at is it also means it's what you'd call traditional, and it also means that it's what you call tolerance of a certain amount of edge. Yeah. But now that doesn't mean the hip hop here isn't as edgy as anything, but there's always going to be a little bit more of a kind of watch your mouth element. I can't think of another way to put it. There's always going to be a traditionalist element with that's going to be like keeping it a little bit more classy, well, I guess, and with the language.
Yeah. I think because everybody works with everybody here too. So you don't know, who's working with, Christian artists who could be working with a rap artist the next day, or a hip hop artist, or a country artist the next day.
And there are loads of Christian rap artists. I didn't in any way mean to infer that.
No. Yeah.
Have a Christian subgenre. Yeah. And even when, I mean, I listen to rap more than anything. When hip hop, when rappers cuss, they inject, you can put, God and the F word in the same sentence. And you know what I mean? And you're still paying respect to the man upstairs. All I mean is, or the woman upstairs, whoever people want to say. The thing is, in answer to your question, yeah, I think Nashville will stay a certain amount country. You could try to infuse it with different things. But as we've seen radio, also, dude, radio here is really traditional in the sense that, like country rap got no radio play. So I could just point to that whole genre, not a single song, even though they were popping up in the Billboard Country Top 10 album chart the same week as other things. And that's really, call BS on that if you want, but that shows you the power, I won't say stranglehold, but the power that the people that decide the format have over what content they play to support that format, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's only going to change a certain amount,
Oh, absolutely. So let's talk about Nashville and food. It's something that we love to talk about here on this podcast. And, as much as music is growing here, the food scene here in Nashville is exploding.
Yeah, the food trucks, right?
Oh, it's incredible. Are there some places that you really, really, really enjoy here in Nashville food-wise?
I don't want to sound like an old man, but I'm 44 and I live in Hendersonville. So, I'm downtown when I'm on Music Row a couple days a week, and I'm, so there are some, I will say one place that's in Hendersonville was going to be one of the fastest growing, scary wise, as we like it small, but suburbs in the next couple of years here, is Rio Bravo. It is the best Mexican place you will ever eat at. However, I will tell you about a place in East Nashville that's the second best Mexican place you'll ever eat at, and it's called Rose Pepper.
Yep.
Yeah, we talk about Rose Pepper all the time.
It's where my wife and I had our first date, actually.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and we've eaten there for years. Whenever we have company in town, that's where we go. I tend to find like a lot of locals that unless you really want to deal with, Broadway is really for tourists. I mean, they have great restaurants down there, but Loveless Cafe is like a million miles from there. There used to be an incredibly good place called Nashville that got torn down.
Oh, I know. That was
sucker condo developer.
That was such a songwriter and like a local staple.
Music business restaurant. I can't tell you the number of meetings I've had over there. It was affordable. It was cool. It was located right, like you said, right there down there. What was the cross streets down there? It's next to Losers. I mean, really, across sort of the road from you, in the old Great Escape location, and by Vanderbilt. So that place, there's one of those in Green Hill still, just to support them.
Right.
But yeah, Rose Pepper, definitely. There's another place that I love to tell people about, called Ted's Montana Grill, which is over on
Ted's
West
is
End.
great.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the best. They're the only bison restaurant in town that's exclusively bison. And Ted Turner's the biggest bison farmer in the country. And a lot of what we eat of that bison is minimal to what he keeps alive, for whatever that matters or doesn't.
Right.
But they have the best pickles. They have, I love that place. Thinking, there's a beautiful place called the Tin Angel that just closed. And if you're looking for like $100, sort of date night, that was a nice place to go. Let's see. I don't know. What about you guys? What is your favorite of the moment?
So we have this place that is almost, you even get close to it and your mouth starts watering. But it's a place called Oscar's Tacos, and they have about probably 10 locations around
10 or 11. Yeah.
Nashville, Middle Tennessee right now. And it was on our top restaurants list for 2019. But it's been our favorite places for our stomachs in 2020. And I mean, it's just the California, kind of Mexican scene that's come here to Nashville. It was started by a family, and they've expanded rapidly, and it's some of the best, I think, kind of your fast casual Mexican food that I think that Nashville has to offer. It's absolutely incredible.
And each entree is under $10 a person, which is fantastic.
Yeah, there's a place also that I can't think of the name of, but it's over in the hospital section. It's a little place. It's like a Cajun Jamaican place. It has like just awesome. I wish I could remember their name.
Is it Calypso Casino or Calypso Cafe?
No, it's not Calypso, but it's over in that area. But yeah, those are Rose Pepper, Rio Bravo. I'm sure I'm leaving out. People like, there's a place on Broadway called Mojo's that's really cool. If you are going to get stuck down there, it's one of the more local, less tourist. No offense to tourists, but it's one of the less touristy kind of places. And there's another place down there called Bailey's that has a really cool second floor open patio, live music. I actually just saw an artist there in 2003, and we did a record, and now we're re-releasing it with some new stuff from Nola Andrews. It'll be out next week, the first EP of that music. But I saw her down there. I mean, it's an amazing part of town, or place in that part of town. And then also, there used to be a pool place up there on 2nd Avenue. That place called is that Buffalo Billiards or
Buffalo Billiards.
Something?
Yep.
Yeah, they moved. They used to have a more kind of divey vibe, but they're still pretty solid pool place, and they have a pretty good appetizer menu if you're just kind of doing that.
So,
but I wish I had a more eclectic list, man.
that's a great list.
What about places to maybe experience Nashville? If you were to either go visit somewhere yourself, or places in Nashville you like to frequent that might not be too tourist heavy. It might be kind of a hidden gem place, or maybe just a place to relax around town. Red Door Inn. Yeah, Red Door.
Red Door is a bar, but it's over on Music Row. It's a Music Row bar. Losers is another cool one. They're bars, unfortunately, I have to tell you. Losers is cool. Red Door Inn is cool. There's places over by Music Row that there's a lot fewer of them, thankfully, and the ones that are there still. Idle Hour is great. Bob's Idle Hour. I mean, there's 3 or 4 bars that just give you a really authentic, non-tourist but still country bar flavor, and they're really laid back, and you can get food there if you want. But those, because there's also this thing, a little strip of places I don't go to, but I drive by it every couple times a week. caffeine used to be over there. It's like before Buddy Killen Circle. Maybe
Demumbrian Hill. You're talking about Demumbrian Hill.
Demumbrian Hill.
Tin Roof, Just Love Coffee, Tailgate Brewery. Yep.
Yeah, and then there's a delicious place called the Sambuca over in the Gulch, right at the edge of the Gulch, that I would definitely recommend. Those are restaurants. I mean, beyond that, man, like we have kind of an art museum with the Frist. Sometimes you get good exhibits there, but you know, if you're a tourist here, you're inevitably going to wind up on Broadway.
Oh yeah,
so that's just where to begin. And you can do the Ryman tour down there, which is cool. I guess if your thing is kind of shopping malls and that, Opryland is always a good thing because you have the option there to see shows. You have the option there to go to that Willie Nelson sort of bar in the Dukes of Hazzard place and kind of get they have stuff out there. You have to have well, now you don't. You can get a hotel down there. There's a bunch of new restaurants I'm not thinking of because I'm ignorant to them. I haven't eaten at them yet that are downtown where all these new hotels have gone up. I'm sure there's some good additional eateries there and places to check out. Country music, Johnny Cash Museum is always cool. Country Music Hall of Fame, obviously. I mean, nothing I'm going to give you is not what's on the brochure.
Are there
it's a small town, though, hopefully compared to other cities for that reason. I would say this. West End's got a beautiful park. If you're looking to walk around safely, West End, because Vanderbilt patrols that whole area really, really, really tightly. And Vanderbilt's campus is gorgeous, and you can walk around on it. I mean, it's that whole area, 21st Avenue over there. Yeah. There's some cool stores over there, and there's that pancake place. I'm not thinking of. You guys know the name of that place?
Pancake Pantry.
Yeah, world famous pancake place, and so there's enough to do here.
What about one thing? If you had royal powers for one day, and your only thing was you could add one thing to Nashville to make it a better city. Doesn't matter if it's practical or not. What would you do?
Building.
Less condos. So you would take away.
They'd be gone. They would be gone. All of them. But that aside, beyond that, man, I could tell you one thing. Hendersonville, where Johnny Cash, of course, lived, and my wife was born and raised, and we live now, and a lot of people I know who work in the business do. It's really a cool suburb. It's got this really kind of, it's not run down. It's just underutilized Main Street that used to have 3 or 4 live music clubs.
Right.
And if they could establish some kind of alternate to downtown for locals and people that want to come play songs, Hendersonville could stand to use a little bit more money injected into its live scene, because I promise you there's the people here to like, it's like Franklin. No one's going to tell you that Franklin 20 years ago was going to have the downtown. It has even a smaller Murfreesboro, but if there's a demand there, I think Nashville could do more to kind of support its suburb cities having a little bit of more live music options, so you don't have to drive all the way downtown, which right now, climate-wise, is to do that. A lot of people work in the city and go out of it at night, so having other places to go see live music could definitely be a positive.
Yeah, and I think your example of Franklin is great because even on the weekends down there in Franklin, they're 400 space garage or whatever, however many spaces are in that garage. It's full every single weekend in that parking garage.
It's a quaint little downtown city square and all that, but they still have a lot of stuff down there. And there's enough cops around to make sure that the teenagers don't get too wild, so to speak. But it's at the same time, for live crowds and live music, it would give people that many more places to have an opportunity to go play live at than they do. And I think that's the one thing that could have a little less of a stranglehold on it, if I'm speaking frankly.
Yes.
And the only way you do that is by having more places, more options, right?
Yeah. So. I love that. All right, Jake Brown, your new book, Behind the Boards in Nashville, your 50th book. Congratulations on that. Such an amazing accomplishment. It sounds like you are a workhorse, so I can't wait to see what comes out.
Baby. Always be working.
Yeah, there you go. I can't wait to.
If you want to write for a living, songs or books or whatever, you have got to always be working.
There you go. I love it. Where can people buy your book and follow you and find out more information on future releases?
Oh, I'm an old geezer, but because of my publicists and publishers, I'm forced to be on social media. So we've got a Twitter. We've got behind BTB Nashville is the Twitter. There's an Instagram, Behind the Boards Nashville. There's, of course, my website, which is jakebrownbooks.com. There's the Facebook page, which is also my name. There's, just if you're looking for my stuff, as far as the book beyond that, there's, of course, we've been very lucky with, especially as overly competitive right now because everyone's staying at home and digital so overflowed.
Yeah.
American Songwriter and Sounds Like Nashville and yourselves and Wide Open Country. And CMT did 2 stories in the book. So you've been able to read a little bit about it there. They have those links all embedded there. You can buy it, of course, on Audible, on Amazon, on any of the digital sites, Kobo. There's a bunch of them, the library site. And it'll be out in stores at some point in July, depending on how the staggered publishing schedule from June and May that got delayed. Those books are all now just hitting stores, so everything is backlogged a little, but you can find it if you want it.
And that was Jake Brown talking about his book, Behind the Boards, Nashville. I learned quite a bit behind the scenes about producers and everything that happens behind the scenes of music. That's incredible.
And that was just with an hour of talking with him. I can't wait to learn, what else is in these 600 pages. We've got a lot of learning to do on the music industry still.
Yeah, I am naive when it comes to the music industry.
Yeah, so Jake Brown and his book, Behind the Boards Nashville, available everywhere. Very, very cool that you can stream along, watch along as well. So very, very cool to have that. You can get that anywhere. The links are in the show notes if you are interested in this book. So we were happy to have Jake on. We hope you learned a little bit as well, for sure. This won't be the last time you'll hear from Jake. We'll be having more conversations with him later. We hope you are having a great weekend here in Nashville, and we are looking forward to our next Nashville Story episode next week. So stay tuned for that. For everybody else, so we hope you have a great weekend. We'll see you back on Monday.